The disturbing mystery of a psychopath who secretly watches, follows, and beheads women one by one. The film begins by introducing a married couple named Franz and Julia, who have just arrived in Romania. They previously lived in the United States, but after Franz received a promotion, the company he works for assigned him to work in Romania. Coincidentally, Franz's mother is originally from Romania, so it is no surprise that he is fluent in the Romanian language.
Hey, easy.
You don't speak Romanian.
As a supportive wife, Julia decides to move to Romania with Franz to accompany him. Because their move happened suddenly, Julia must begin adapting to a new environment and also learn Romanian so she can communicate with the people there. She plans to start learning the language as soon as she arrives in Romania. After a long journey from the United States, they finally reach Romania. Feeling exhausted from the very long trip, they immediately go to their new apartment. Once there, they make love before going to sleep. In the middle of the night, Julia wakes up and casually looks out the window to observe the surroundings of the apartment complex. Her attention is suddenly drawn to a mysterious man in the building across from her apartment who appears to be staring toward her apartment with a sharp gaze. Julia does not think too much about it and decides to go back to sleep. The next morning, Franz leaves for work early. Julia, who has just woken up, tidies up the apartment while practicing her Romanian.
May Formosa.
After finishing her household chores, she begins exploring the area around the neighborhood. That evening, while waiting for Franz to come home from work, Julia once again sees the man staring at her from a distance. Feeling uncomfortable being watched repeatedly, she turns off the apartment light so the man can no longer see her, but he continues to look toward her apartment. Julia is then startled by the arrival of Franz, who has just returned from work. Not wanting to worry him, she chooses not to tell him about the strange man.
How is work?
Feeling bored staying inside, Franz and Julia decide to take a walk around their apartment area. While chatting, they notice a crowd of people and police officers investigating something nearby. No one there seems to know exactly what incident has occurred. The next day, the incident that Franz and Julia saw is broadcast on the television news. Since Julia is not yet fluent in Romanian, she asks Franz to translate the news for her. According to the news anchor, a young woman was murdered in her apartment the previous night. The killer has not yet been caught due to a lack of evidence at the crime scene. That evening, Franz invites his close friend Simeon and Simeon's wife to have dinner at their apartment. They talk about many things related to their past. Julia chooses to remain quiet because she struggles to join the conversation due to her limited Romanian skills. Later, they discuss the news about the woman who was killed near Franz and Julia's apartment. At that moment, Franz and Julia learn that the woman was beheaded by a mysterious psychopath. It is also revealed that a similar case happened a month earlier involving another young woman, and it is highly likely that both crimes were committed by the same person. Because the identity of the psychopath remains unknown, the police have given him the nickname the Spider Psychopath. Later, Julia goes outside to take out the trash. On the staircase, she meets a neighbor named Irina, who then becomes Julia's first friend in Romania. The next day, Julia, still curious about the murders committed by the spider psychopath, begins searching for more information about the case on the internet and finds a video featuring the testimony of a woman who managed to survive the terror of the psychopath. The woman tells her story about how she was often watched by a mysterious figure known as the Spider Psychopath, and one night the psychopath sneaked into her house and covered her face with a pillow so she could not see his face. He then began slicing her neck, but strangely, he only cut a small portion of her skin. Even more disturbing, the psychopath, who was known for being extremely brutal, simply stared at her for hours without killing her before finally leaving her alive. After that incident, every month there has always been a new victim, all of them young women, and every victim was killed by having their throat cut until it was severed. Hearing this story makes Julia increasingly anxious and cautious when she is alone, fearing that the psychopath may now be looking for a new target and that she could be the next one. Later, Julia goes to watch a movie at the cinema, but shortly after sitting down, she feels that a mysterious figure is sitting behind her and constantly watching her. Without turning around to see who it is, Julia immediately leaves because she feels uncomfortable. She decides to go somewhere crowded, choosing the supermarket since she also needs to buy groceries. Not long after arriving there, Julia realizes she is once again being followed by the same person who had watched her at the cinema. She tries hard to avoid the man, and luckily manages to escape the supermarket through the back door. That night during dinner with Franz, Julia tells him about being followed by a mysterious man and says she suspects that the person might be the spider psychopath. Seeing Julia constantly frightened and anxious, Franz becomes worried and decides to take her back to the supermarket to find out who the man really was.
Aș putea să vorbesc cu un. What time are you in?
Around 4th.
Using the supermarket's CCTV footage, they search for the man, and after a long time, they finally see his face. Julia immediately takes a photo of the man's image.
That's him. See?
The next day, Julia decides to stay inside the apartment all day so she can feel safe.
Yeah, figured.
While at home, she feels very lonely because Franz is always busy working and does not have much time for her. As she is lost in her thoughts, Julia hears someone repeatedly knocking on her door. Carefully, she approaches the door and discovers it is an elderly woman looking for her cat, but unfortunately, Julia has not seen the cat. Shortly after, Julia meets Irina, who has just returned from work, and in order to get closer, Irina invites Julia to visit her apartment.
Noroc.
They talk about Julia's difficulties adjusting to a new environment in Romania, and Irina deeply understands her situation because she once lived alone in London and had to adapt to a new place while learning English. Irina also mentions that she keeps a gun in her bedroom so she can feel safe. Their conversation is pleasant enough to make Julia forget her worries for a moment.
No. You sure?
But when she returns to her own apartment, her anxiety and fear return. Out of curiosity, Julia looks again at the man who has been watching her since she first moved there and realizes that he has been staring toward her apartment the entire time. To check whether the man is really looking at her, Julia waves one of her hands, and the man waves back as if responding to her gesture. From this moment, Julia begins to suspect that the man watching her from the opposite building might be the same man who followed her to the cinema in the supermarket. Not long after, Franz returns home, and Julia once again tells him about the man who keeps watching her from the opposite building. Unable to tolerate being constantly observed by a stranger, Julia decides to call the police and report the situation.
Think so.
You think so?
Mostly.
Mostly.
She explains that the man has been watching her and following her wherever she goes, and she also shows them the photo she took of him. After receiving the report, the police, accompanied by Franz, go to the opposite building to meet the man. After some time, Franz finally returns home and explains that the man's name is Daniel and that he has lived in the neighborhood for a long time. When the police and Franz met him, Daniel claimed that he never intended to watch Julia and that his habit of looking out the window was simply because he enjoyed observing people's lives. The police and Franz begin to believe Daniel's explanation, and Franz tells Julia that she may have misunderstood him, suggesting that Daniel might have gone to the supermarket merely to shop rather than to follow her. Hearing this, Julia becomes angry with Franz for not believing her because she is convinced that Daniel deliberately followed her. She also has a strong feeling that Daniel is the spider psychopath, believing this because the psychopath is known to stalk his victims before killing them, which is exactly what Daniel has been doing to her. Their differing opinions lead to tension and eventually cause an argument between them.
Fucking believe me!
The next day, feeling bored staying at home, Julia decides to go for a walk around the area. Along the way, she sees Daniel walking toward a certain place, and out of curiosity, she secretly follows him. It turns out that Daniel goes to a club where he works as a janitor. While observing him, Daniel almost notices Julia, and she quickly hides so he cannot see her. By coincidence, Julia runs into Irina, who turns out to work at the club as a dancer. Julia explains that she is there to secretly follow Daniel and asks Irina whether she knows him, but Irina admits that she does not know Daniel at all. Irina then tries to comfort Julia, who feels sad because no one seems to believe her, and Irina is the only one who trusts her story. Irina promises Julia that she will always protect her. That night, Julia dreams of being killed by the spider psychopath, and the nightmare jolts her awake. While she is lost in thought, Julia hears loud noises coming from Irina's apartment, immediately making her panic as she fears Irina might be in danger. Julia repeatedly bangs on Irina's door, disturbing all the residents in the apartment building. The landlord soon arrives and opens Irina's apartment door, only to discover that the noise was caused by a cat. Even so, Julia still feels that something is strange about Irina's apartment. Because of the disturbance Julia caused, the landlord scolds France and Julia.
We have cocktails tonight. You for it?
Later, Franz tells Julia that there will be a party at his workplace that night and invites her to come along. After Franz leaves for work, Julia contacts Irina's workplace to ask about her whereabouts, since Irina has not returned home since the previous night, and they reply that Irina will go home after finishing her shift. Suddenly, Julia hears knocking at Irina's apartment door and meets Irina's ex-boyfriend, Christian. Christian explains that Irina was supposed to meet him the night before, but she never showed up, so worried about her, he came to check on her apartment, thinking she might be there. To confirm this, Julia asks for Irina's phone number and calls it, and from inside the apartment, they hear Irina's phone ringing, indicating that she is inside.
You hear that?
Relieved by this, Julia then asks Christian for help in meeting Daniel. They go together to Daniel's apartment, where Christian bangs on the door and shouts, but despite several attempts, Daniel does not come out.
Alo, răspunde! Știu că ești acasă!
Christian eventually leaves due to an urgent matter, leaving Julia alone. Still curious about Daniel, Julia slowly approaches his apartment, and the door is opened by an elderly man. Julia immediately leaves, but as she is about to go, she comes face to face with Daniel. As night falls, Franz and Julia are getting ready to go to the party when their apartment is suddenly visited by the police. It turns out that Daniel is the one who called them, reporting that Julia had followed him the previous day and disturbed the comfort of Daniel's father. Wanting to resolve the matter quickly, the police ask Julia to apologize to Daniel and hope the issue can be settled amicably. Reluctantly, Julia apologizes so the problem can be resolved.
And I wanted to resolve.
After the police and Daniel leave, Franz shows Julia an online article about the arrest of the spider psychopath, along with the released photo of the killer, and from the image, it is clear that the psychopath is not Daniel. This news makes Julia feel slightly calmer. Franz and Julia then head to the party, where Franz and his colleagues speak in Romanian, leaving Julia unable to understand the conversation.
Întrebarea e dacă tipul ăsta își petrece tot timpul.
Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you.
Maybe it was him.
Fortunately, Simeon helps by translating and reveals that they are talking about Julia's problem with Daniel, with Franz even mentioning that Julia might be paranoid about being followed by a psychopath. Hearing this deeply hurts Julia, as she realizes Franz is speaking badly about her and does not truly believe her, assuming she is paranoid. This leads to another argument between them, and feeling fed up, Julia decides to leave and go home alone by train. While on the train, Julia notices that Daniel is also there, and he suddenly sits across from her and explains the misunderstanding between them, saying that he simply enjoys looking out the window and observing people and never intended to follow her, insisting that their encounters at places like the supermarket were merely coincidences because they live in the same area. After hearing Daniel's explanation directly, Julia apologizes for having negative thoughts about him. When she arrives home, Julia starts packing her belongings, as the argument with Franz makes her no longer want to stay there. While packing, she hears music coming from Irina's apartment and immediately goes there to see her, since she has not met Irina for days. Finding the door unlocked, Julia enters the apartment, and after searching around, she is horrified to discover Irina's body with her head severed. Suddenly, Julia is knocked unconscious by a mysterious figure, and when she regains consciousness, she learns the truth that the spider psychopath is actually Daniel, proving that her suspicions were correct all along, even though no one ever believed her. Daniel killed Irina because Irina tried to interfere and protect Julia, and now Julia is clearly his next target. Not long after, they hear Franz calling out for Julia, and when Julia tries to scream for help, Daniel slashes her throat, causing her to lose a large amount of blood.
Julia?
Believing Julia is dead, Daniel prepares to leave quietly, but as he exits Irina's apartment, he runs into Franz and is suddenly shot by Julia, who is still alive. Irina had once told Julia that she kept a gun hidden in a drawer, and using her remaining strength, Julia manages to kill Daniel, the psychopath who had terrorized the area. After the incident, Julia is rushed to the hospital for treatment, while Franz is left filled with regret for never believing Julia about Daniel's true identity, and the story comes to an end.